Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered, the podcast that takes the mystery out of commercial real estate and makes it accessible for everyone. I'm Caleb David, a broker, investor, and community builder with over a decade of experience helping businesses and individuals bring their visions to life. Here we break down the market, share expert insights, and talk about the opportunities that commercial real estate creates for businesses and communities alike. No fluff, no gatekeeping, just real, unfiltered conversations that empower you to navigate the space with confidence. So whether you're an investor, a business owner, or simply curious about commercial real estate, welcome. Let's dive in. Welcome everyone to Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered. I am excited to have Jake Clopton with us today. He is a serial entrepreneur, economist, commercial real estate finance expert who has helped shape modern commercial real estate lending landscape. I'm going to stop this and start over. Actually, I'll keep recording it and I will start over. And then my team can edit it out.
Cool, no problem.
All right, here it goes. Welcome everybody to Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered. I'm excited to have Jake Clopton with us today. He's a serial entrepreneur, economist, and commercial real estate finance expert who has helped shape the modern commercial real estate lending landscape. He's the founder and president of Clopton Capital. Jake has facilitated billions of dollars in real estate loans, offering tailored debt and equity solutions for commercial properties nationwide. With a background in interbank hedging products and Eurodollar futures trading, Jake brings a deep understanding of interest rate markets and liquidity strategies, making him a sought-after expert for structuring complex and innovative financing solutions. He's also the author of Commercial Real Estate Investing, Understanding, Finding, and Funding Deals in Today's World, where he provides practical insights into navigating commercial real estate markets, securing funding, and mitigating risks. His expertise has been featured in Benzinga, National Mortgage Professional, Multi-Housing News, as well on platforms like Good Morning Chicago and The Viewpoint with Dennis Quaid. Welcome, Jake, from Chicago. We're excited to get to know you a little bit more. I would love to hear from you how you got into this position, a little bit about yourself personally, so we can get to know you and then jump into some questions.
Sure. So you touched on my background a little bit. I started my career, which is really only the second job I had. The one I had before that was making subs in high school. I used to trade interbank hedging product futures, which, 3-month LIBOR, Fed funds, some treasuries, stuff like that. All future contracts in Chicago. Was doing that for a while until the banking crisis.
Yeah.
Right? So, all that stuff kind of, dried up and disappeared.
Yeah.
At the time, it was a liquidity crisis in banks, right? So what I kind of saw in the marketplace was a need to find credit, and nobody could really find it. So my idea was to make a firm that's an intermediary to help find, people loans and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I got to be honest, I didn't even realize at the time I was creating a brokerage shop because I didn't have a background in, intermediary, that type of stuff. It just had the idea.
Yeah.
So I started making phone calls to banks and credit unions and all, anybody I could, and you would just find, money available to lend and people would come to you. And, like 16, 17 years later, here we are, man.
Wow.
Still doing, my day-to-day is still arranging financing.
Yeah.
But we are also an insurance company, a 1031 QI. We have a sales brokerage we just opened this year. We partner with ABGI to do cost segregation. We do commercial solar. Basically, really kind of turned this thing into a commercial real estate services firm, and not just a capital markets firm.
Wow.
So there was a little bit of a journey.
From subs to this.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And a lot of that stuff is new to me. You've got to have some serious expertise and serious involvement and experience to kind of do what you're doing. So you'd mentioned you kind of got into this after the 2008 financial crisis. What were some of the biggest challenges? Obviously, you found some creativity and some resilience in that. What were some of the challenges that you were facing during that time?
Yeah, I think, as anybody who's in commercial real estate knows, it's a relationship business.
Yeah.
Right. And it's all about your connections. So the biggest challenge was making those connections.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I am really, good at cold calling people.
Mm-hmm.
I'll sit there for like 8 hours just cold calling nonstop.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, that is what I attribute all the progress to.
Yeah.
Because David, I'm telling you, I sat there for 2 years straight in my apartment, just calling people all day long, nonstop,
Yeah.
and taking every phone call. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you have 9 phone calls that go absolutely nowhere, but one does, great. It's just a lot of people for some reason, I mean, not for some reason, I get it. Cold calling sucks, but
Yeah.
you got to get over the whole thing. I've had people that worked for me before that would do one call and then need to go, take a walk around the block and smoke a cigarette and come back and do another one. But there's just no, I don't believe there's a real substitute, especially in our industry, commercial real estate, for getting on the phone, talking to people, making the connection and just putting that type of work in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so clearly that was a pretty volatile market. And I know here in the last couple of years, we've had interest rates going up. I don't know that I would call it a volatile market, but it's been a bit of a slower market. But in situations like this, how do you structure creative financing solutions, when things are a little bit, I mean, a lot of people have just been unsure of what's going on. A lot of people have been holding off. And, what are how do you create some creative financing?
So you said something that definitely, earmarks this market, right? Uncertainty.
Yeah.
And the thing is, commercial real estate is just a math problem.
Yeah.
Right. And the cost of capital, interest rates, is one part of that math problem.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed is kind of no matter where it goes, as long as people can pencil a deal to where things are and not going to change, you can usually figure it out, right?
Yeah.
But what creates the paralysis is the uncertainty, right? It's like, and rates, this rate hiking cycle was the fastest rate hiking in history. Yeah. So that's a lot of volatility. And then, you've got a lot of, and I think also people, have trouble understanding the difference in the yield curve between short-term rates and long-term rates, right? Because you've got short-term rates that went up really high, but then, you've got long-term rates of treasuries, which are super volatile, which have come down and then up and then down, right? So the uncertainty of where the cost of capital is going to be, not only today, but in the future, does make it really difficult to pencil these deals, right? Because when you've got a variable that changes in real time, day to day, it's hard to make long-term decisions, because that's what commercial real estate is, right? It's a long-term decision.
Yeah.
And that's what I think created a lot of the paralysis. As far as how we get around stuff today, what we usually do in my company, and we have the advantage of being able to do that because we're not a direct lender, we're an intermediary and a capital markets firm, is we can kind of pivot to whatever is working.
Yeah.
So a good idea of this is COVID was actually a pretty good time for us.
Yeah.
Because everything else wasn't working.
Yeah.
But we pivoted into a sector that we have never really focused on before. So I started doing a ton of home builder financing.
Interesting.
But those are the only deals that were really working, right? That's everybody is moving down south, and there was different areas that there was population growth. There's lots of home building and lots of home demand in certain areas, and we ended up doing a bunch of that finance. So we have that advantage to be able to do that. As far as like getting creative and this and that, the deals still need to pencil.
Right.
But we have, private debt funds, banks, credit unions, life cos, all at our disposal, as well as like some mezz and pref equity, stuff like that. And like the areas where I've seen a need to get creative in, after the rate hiking cycle was, let's say like people that got caught off guard by the rates going up.
Yeah.
Variable rate, high leverage, multifamily value add, bridge loans, for instance.
Yeah.
So, you can come in and try to save some of those deals with like, layering in some pref equity and coming into them. That's a lot of like the creative aspect I've seen, with the higher cost of capital and needing to, find like alternative products to really save deals.
Right. So I think it's important for people and buyers to understand, investors, that there are creative financing solutions like you provide. Because I think a lot of times people get stuck in this. It's just the interest rate is the interest rate. There's nothing else I can do. But, I think you're exactly right. There are some creative ways to pencil deals that make sense in spite of a volatile market. And obviously you've got to count the cost and all of that. But one question out of curiosity that I have is, How did you see, I know at least in the Colorado market, we saw post-COVID just a huge increase in the demand for industrial product,
Yep.
with retailers shrinking, et cetera. What was your experience in lending and structuring deals in the industrial market during that time?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it wasn't just COVID, right? That caused it. There was a lot, like there's all logistical space that people were after.
Yeah.
And it was, just a continuation of the e-commerce trends and that whole thing blowing up. I mean, Amazon alone was responsible for eating up a lot of that logistical space.
Right.
Um, you know, Industrial was just what everyone is after for so long.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I've seen some of that demand start to fall off. I don't know if it's necessarily, lower demand for the product, but maybe just some like oversupply in some areas. Because when you have so much capital pouring into just one asset type,
right,
tends to get a little overbuilt.
Yeah.
So I have seen a little bit of that market start to crack, but remember COVID, you had like all the supply, issues, right? I mean, everything was a supply constraint issue,
Yeah.
which, it would make sense that we would need more logistical space for people, to kind of store stuff and then, be able to move it out, when it's needed. So,
Yeah.
But, I have seen that it's either oversupplied or demand is waning a little bit in that industrial space.
Okay. That's good to hear. So how does your background in interest rate markets and financial trading influence your approach to structuring deals right now?
Well, I quite often get asked where rates are going. You know what I mean? And how long people should like plan, as far as like fixed periods and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can give some pretty good insight as far as like which side of the curves I think are going to move first and stuff like that. But and this is a good way of thinking about interest rates, right? Like somebody asked me like, hey, where are rates going? Okay, well, I can tell you where they're going today.
Yeah.
But something may happen tomorrow that completely changes everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like just think about where rates were going just a month ago. And then now look at the 10-year now. Now we're back at 4% today, right? We were at 4.6 or something. I mean, long-term rates are and can be very volatile. And that's where that's the part of the curve where people try to do the most planning, right? They try to be like an interest rate trader. Like, all right, should I lock in for 5 years or 10 years? Something like that. And a lot of times what I tell people is like, hey, it really don't try to trade interest rates. Like you're buying real estate. You're not really an interest rate trader. If you want to do this thing where you think rates are, coming down in the future, try to get the longest fixed period you can and the most flexible prepay. Right. Yeah. But what I wouldn't do, and what I see a lot, is I see people go into deals like syndicators or something like that, and they modeled some of their returns because they're like, oh, rates are coming down in the future. Don't worry. Right. We'll get cap rate, compression, because, multifamily trades at a 220 spread over the 10-year, and then that'll come down and you'll get X return. That is not something that I think people can count on, because again, anything can happen in the meantime.
Yeah.
Look, a lot of those deals that were modeled in like 2021 or whatever, like a lot of those deals were relying on cap rate compression, and that did not work out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's important. I talked about this on the podcast before, how the importance of people having experts in their corner that can help them walk through these types of deals, in times like this where you just don't know, what to expect, but have to be as educated as possible. And so I encourage folks, if you're looking at trying to get into commercial real estate, or you're trying to figure things out, to get a hold of Jake and his team to kind of get some advice and get some direction, because I think it's important that commercial real estate still moves forward, even though the steps are different than they used to be. Sure. It's time to get creative, I think, at this point. So, so I think a lot of what you're talking about requires resilience, adaptability. So how would you apply that resilience, adaptability in financing strategies across the different property types, like say multifamily, office, and industrial? What are some of those the strategies that you would apply?
I think. Look, nothing commercial real estate is really rocket science, right? I mean, it's pretty basic. But generally speaking, like what our firm does would be difficult for one guy just to do by himself, because we've been doing it for almost 20 years, very efficient at it. But there's a general principle that I kind of, live and work by. And I'll give you an example. On any one deal, I'll talk to like 200 bankers.
Wow.
Okay. Any deal, right? That's the value we bring, right? We're brokers, we do that. I may talk to, and 3 or 4 of those bankers may be at the same bank, different branches, same bank, same institution. I will get 4 different answers from those 4 guys at the same place, right? And for like any reason.
Yeah.
Like, one guy, you find out he's about to go on paternity leave, right? Another guy, he just closed a big deal, he doesn't want to deal with it. Another guy, he doesn't really know what his credit guy is going to think, or I don't know, he ate his sandwich out of the fridge and he doesn't like them, and I don't know. And then you get another guy that's like, oh yeah, I just did a deal like that, a couple miles away. I know how to present it. This business is like 90% presentation.
Yeah.
And and honestly, like, you hear about deals getting done that you didn't think that they could get done. They probably got done. It's just they knew the right people at the right places and presented it the right way.
Yeah.
So don't forget that, like, a lot of people see lending, the lending side of this, and it's numbers, and they think, oh, it's just a cold answer and there's not really much that goes on it. It's very much so still just people.
Yeah.
And the longer that I'm in this business, the more I come to terms with the fact that even though it's lending, even though it's based on math, it is still a judgment call by the people that are behind it in the credit firm. Because I'll be honest with you, I've had deals turned down for the dumbest reason. Yeah. Like, oh, there's a black cat in front of the building, and we don't land on buildings with black cats in front. Just like I mean, almost as dumb reasons as that. But it's like, that was a real credit decision that affected a $5 million deal, right? Like, why is that? I had a deal turned down one time because one of the board members at the bank used to go to the property in high school and drink there or something. I'm like, this is like 60 years ago, man. Like, wow. I'm telling you, like, so just keep in mind that type of stuff. And the reason why I say that is because I think a lot of people get discouraged because they get one answer and they're like, oh, well, that must be the answer across
the board.
Industry. Yeah, it's not. And it's not even remotely close. Yeah. Not only is every lender and bank different, you think all banks have the same guy. It's not even remotely close. But even the same people inside the banks have different answers to give you. So just, unless you're just trying to do something crazy, right? Like 100% financing.
Yeah.
But if the deal makes sense, the economics are strong, something like that, it can get done. And that's a lot of the value that I bring, right? Like I've done so many deals and I probably talked to, okay, this is a good differentiator of like who we are.
Yeah.
I talk to more banks and credit unions. Like I said, I talk to 200 in every deal than anybody else in this industry.
Yeah.
And, I'll be the first to tell you that, like, you get one answer, you just keep going as long as this is a deal that should get done.
Right. Yeah, I think what you're saying is definitely it takes persistence. And I think that's something I found, in the brokerage side of things, commercial real estate brokerage, is that certain banks have certain appetites for certain things. You might have a lender that doesn't want to fund a brewery, but they would do a restaurant, so I think coming down to that relationship, it's understanding who these lenders are and what their appetite is and not giving up if the deal makes sense.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. So do you have an example of maybe one of the creative, innovative financing structures that you did for a client that came out well?
I can tell you the best job I ever think I did as a broker.
Yeah.
Is I do a lot of creative stuff with like historic tax credit deals, stuff like that. And I had this deal in Kansas City. I won't say exactly what it was, but the guys were gifted the building, and they were doing a special use property type with it. There was tons of tax credits, all this stuff, and it was in a dilapidated area. And I found them financing I talked to every bank I can. I found them financing because I found a government program that had earmarked money to one particular bank in the area, and they needed to distribute that money to low income community development projects like this. Yeah. And I literally, like, they're literally the only institution in the country that would lend on this thing.
Wow.
So that, in addition to arranging the tax credit bridges and the syndication, and there was brownfield involved, I would say that was one of the most complicated deals, but like just the way we found the money.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of like a lot of the way that I look at what we do. Right.
Yeah.
I'm not just sourcing alone. Like, I'm finding buckets of capital that are there to be deployed.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we do now is go and find those buckets of capital. They have unique, like, value propositions, right? Yeah. They're competitive in XYZ, or I think they're unique in some way. And then we'll go market that in particular, right? So it's kind of like fishing with the right bait, as opposed to like getting a loan and trying to cram it into some hole somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of what we do now today is kind of the way I position, is like finding those buckets of capital and then taking them out to the market and trying to make deals for it.
Love that. So where do you see, like, maybe what are some major trends that you see in the financing landscape for the next 5, maybe 10 years?
Good question. So I talked a lot to banks, credit unions, and a lot of banks, credit, like, they want to lend. They're kind of liquidity constrained, and I'll, not to go too much into the weeds and like macroeconomic stuff like this, but like, if you were to go look at the reverse repo facility on the St. Louis Fed website, you could see the thing used to have like $2 trillion in it. Yeah. That was basically like a saving account for banks. The Fed has completely depleted that, right? And so that, what you would say is that was like a barometer of bank liquidity. Yeah. That's why now a lot of times when you go to local regional banks, you get asked how much deposits you're going to put up.
Right.
We've all seen that, right? That's a new thing. And banks weren't answering that before, and that's why a lot of bank liquidity has dried up, because the Fed, sucked liquidity out of the system by raising rate.
Yeah.
That trend's going to continue for a while.
Yeah.
Right. The banks, don't get me wrong, there's no crisis. The banks are healthy, but it's not like it used to be, where the system was just so flush with cash, right? And a lot of that was leftover PPP loans and COVID area liquidity, stuff like that. That's all gone.
Yeah.
So I think that trend is going to continue. And basically what it means is there's a little bit of a transition between just transactional lending and relationship lending, right? And they call it relationship lending, but what they really mean is like, hey, we need money to leverage to lend you this deal, and you're gonna have a relationship as long as we feel like having the relationship. So yeah, the relationship is very one. So that is going to continue. And because of that, the private, lending area is probably going to continue to grow, especially with short-term lending. Institutions that look for relationships really don't like short-term lending. And what is that? Bridge loans and construction, right? Because, a lot of times they don't end up keeping the loan. Right. It moves on, or the guy sells it, stuff like that. So the private lenders are that's why all these private lenders have like, short-term, terms, stuff like that. Also, they can insure capital, but also that's where the real need is, right? So I think, the lending capital base, in private lending is probably going to continue to grow and stay very active and probably get a bigger piece of the pie. As far as lending standards, I think lending standards in like, regulation and some of like, these depositories is loosening up a little bit. So they're able to lend on more, but they're just still kind of constrained by liquidity. Yeah. As anybody that's in this market right now, I'll touch base on the other side of the cap stack. Equity is really hard right now. Everybody knows, like, all the LP guys I talk to have migrated down into the pref equity space. It's hard to find reliable LP equity out there. Hopefully that trend, moves. I think you really need like a couple of these big family offices and stuff like that to really, start dipping their toe back in and offering like reliable pref, or excuse me, not pref, but LP. Yeah. It's out there, but it's not like it was before. Okay. But as of now, there's more than enough pref equity that you can chew on. Okay. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, so what are some of like, as far as lenders and investors, what's kind of their like sentiment right now towards commercial real estate in your experience?
I mean, look, the demographic trends and, the macro trends for real estate are strong. I mean, especially like housing, stuff like that. I mean, we still have a housing shortage, huge housing shortage.
Yeah.
Right. And even with kind of where things are in the economy and like how pushed they are, rents are still going up.
Yeah.
All over the place.
True.
Especially like Chicago rents go up like 10% every year. So, I mean, some areas, we've hit peak rents because they had such high growth, like some of like the Sunbelt states, places like that.
Yeah.
But, as far as multifamily, it's still the preferred asset type. I think, there's certain sectors that, got to push like, high-end Class A stuff. Probably some of that needs to come down.
Yeah.
But if you're in like the workforce housing space where it's like transitional, right? Like you can move up or down into different classes of housing. Everybody wants to lend on that.
Right.
Office, I think people are getting more comfortable with office. I've had a lot of lenders bid on office stuff. My feeling with, office was once the Fed corrected the dislocation labor market, dislocation meaning there was more jobs than people looking for jobs. Now that's switched. The hiring, power goes back to the employer, and employers want people in the office. So that, will start to turn around. Although CBD office is still going to remain tough. Retail is very strong, actually. Hotels are good. People still have discretionary into. So, just in general, like, I don't have any lenders that are bearish on real estate in general and asset prices. If anything, as rates come down, asset prices will go back up, and doing these deals will get easier.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, I feel like we could talk for a while, but I want to honor your time. I've got more questions, but maybe we can circle back around some other time. But what I'd love to do is one of the things I do towards the end of an episode is just ask a question to all of my guests that I stole from another podcaster who gave me permission. And I just thought it was really, it's one of those questions when he asked me and I was on his, it just really made me think. But so if you could meet with anybody, dead or alive, right now, tonight, you're going out for dinner, going out for a nice dinner. There's a table of 4. You're in one seat. There's 3 other seats. Who are those people that would be sitting at that table with you? Who would you want to be there to talk to, ask questions, get to know? And then what would you be eating?
Oh, man. Good questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Who do I think would be the most? I'm going to go with current people.
Okay.
People who would be the most interesting? All right. Some of these are probably I'll get flack for. Not this is not political at all. I just think they're the most relevant people out there. I'm going to go with like Warren Buffett, Elon, and I want to say Trump, but I feel like I won't get straight answers out of him.
That's fair.
Who else would be? You know what? I'm gonna throw Putin in there, man. Give me somebody controversial.
Yeah.
give me a villain.
That's awesome.
The people that are really affecting things in the world right now.
Yeah. To be able to try to get inside their head and understand a little bit more.
Yeah, like what's really going on?
I love that. That's awesome. Well, Jake, thanks for being with us. How can people find you, online? We'll include this in the notes as well for the podcast, but where can people get a hold of you?
All right. So 2 things about that. One, I'm exceptionally easy to find. Just Google my name. You can put my contact information in there. Like if you can't find me, I don't know. You just can't use it. I'm not. 2, we are hiring and looking for commercial real estate brokers in major MSAs.
Okay.
And these guys will have access to our financing platform and insurance and everything to make money. So
yeah,
if anybody's interested, give me a shout.
All right, that's great. I love that. Well, thanks, Jake, for your time and your expertise sharing.
Thank you.
Look forward to following your journey a little bit more, and hope you have a great rest of today. That's a wrap on this episode of Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered. I hope you found value in today's conversation and feel more confident about navigating the world of commercial real estate. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody who could benefit from these insights. You can connect with me, Caleb David, and the team at David Commercial Real Estate. Just check the show notes for more information. Thanks for listening, and remember, Creating space is more than just real estate. It's about building community. See you next time.